Mary had a little man.
The fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream. Change has come to America.
Believe me.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind.
Did you hand over any and all documents?
Well, I will. I've said it publicly. I said it yesterday. More than happy to cooperate with everyone. I just want the truth to get out there. I mean, that's part of why I released all the stuff today. I wanted to get it all out there. They're trying to drag out the story, in all fairness. Yeah. You know, they have it. They want to drip a little bit today, drip a little bit then. So I was like, here it is. I'm more than happy to be transparent about it, and I'm more than happy to cooperate with everyone.
So as far as you know, as far as this incident is concerned, this is all of it?
This is everything. This is everything.
Okay, so here you have little Donnie Jr. trying to pass this meeting off as if it were one Russian woman trying to talk about adoption, and now it involves the entire cast of Dr. Zhivago. There are 8 people in this meeting. Every day his story changes. You know, and it turns out that one of the guys, now I know everything about him that I can know, everything that's public about him, he's a Russian spy. And he says, oh, well, you know, I hung out with the counterintelligence people. I did spy for a little while, but, I don't spy anymore. Is there such a thing as a former spy? Or is that like a guy who used to be in the mafia? I don't think you just walk away, but let's ask Malcolm Nance, because he's a former spy and the author of The Plot to Hack America. Hey, Malcolm.
Hi, Randy. How are you?
Are you a former spy, or will you always be a counterintelligence person?
Well, I'm a counterterrorism guy.
Oh,
so
terrorism.
That makes it better.
That's even worse.
It's not like I'm ever going to be out of a job. But, yeah, it's very hard for people to want to stay out of the game. And many of us do. Many go on to other lucrative and successful careers. However, we're talking not about just a Western person. We're talking about an ex-KGB officer. Actually, not KGB.
GRU.
He was Russian military intelligence.
Yeah,
That's
he was
right.
GRU.
Which is, their version of Defense Intelligence Agency and, the Army, Air Force, Navy intelligence. But they have espionage duties. And under the Soviet Union, GRU officers were deeply involved with activities closely related to the KGB. That being said, in Putin's world, when he left the KGB and became the enforcer of the city of St. Petersburg, one of the rules that he enacted in order to gain control of the mafia was that everyone he was associated with, even today, when he created oligarchs, they all had to have an ex-KGB, GRU, or SVR, that's their new external intelligence agency, on their staff. You could not be a billionaire without a former spy who was loyal to Putin somewhere very close to you.
Well,
so to find this guy in the middle of the meeting, even though he's an American citizen now, and a lobbyist.
He's got dual citizenship. He's a lobbyist who never registered as a foreign agent. And what's interesting about that oligarchy job he had, at one of the biggest kleptocracies in Russia, was a company called Prevezon.
Prevezon, right.
And so he's working at Prevezon, and so is Natalia. Isn't that something?
Well, you know what I say, Nance's law, right? Coincidence takes a lot of planning.
I keep telling that to my new producer, Scotty Mednick. I keep telling him that Malcolm Nance taught me there are no coincidences in this world.
No, not at all.
So,
yeah, go on, man.
No, I was just going to say that I was reading this letter that, Charles Grassley in the Senate was very hip to this back in April of 2017. And he wrote a letter, right? He wrote a letter to John Kelly at Homeland Security. And in this letter, he says that Mr. Akhmedchin, a Russian immigrant to the U.S., has admitted being, and they put it in quotes, what he said about his own self. He said that he was a, quote, Soviet counterintelligence officer. In fact, he worked for GRU. And guess what his specialty was, Malcolm?
Yeah, propaganda and political warfare.
Disinformation, political warfare, and propaganda. He is known as a key pro-Russian political operator. So,
Right.
His main area of expertise was fake news.
I've been saying this since last year that, certainly since I've written this book, which was last September 23rd,
wow.
that this investigation is going to have multiple lines of inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
There is no one dirty trick team. There is multiple. There will be multiple dirty tricks teams. There is no one co-op.
No, listen. This meeting.
There will be multiple teams.
I know, and I think what Mueller is really looking at, quite frankly, and I think the reason why it's going to take as long as it's going to take is because he's looking at all this money laundering. I mean, Prevezon is a company based out of Cyprus that is controlled by the Russian government, okay? And
right.
they were charged with one of the biggest tax frauds in the history of Russia. $230 million was taken out of the Russian treasury, given to this Russian-owned company, and they wrote a good chunk of it off on a guy named Bill Browder's investment company, Hermitage Capital Investment, right?
Right.
Okay. And so Browder, go ahead.
Browder wrote all about this in his book, Red Notice.
And Browder, filed also a complaint, a FARA complaint. The foreign, I think that this show was the first show that ever brought up the fact that if you're lobbying for a foreign government, you have to register as a foreign agent. And I know this because Howard was one of the top 50 lobbyists in Washington, and then he's my significant other. So, when this all started happening, he goes, how are these people lobbying like this without registering? And let me check if they're registered. No one was. Well, Bill Browder got hip to this too. And Bill Browder filed a FARA complaint on Hermitage Capital Management stationery. And in it, he goes through all the cast of characters and what they were trying to do. And in a nutshell, what they were trying to do is because of the Prevezon case, okay, they were trying to do two things. One, shield the information about where this money was invested in Manhattan condos, which buildings, who owned them. That was what Natalia's job was. Okay, and
right.
And she was also, they formed this fake NGO in Delaware that was supposed to be all about Russian adoption. But, the Russian adoption problem is Russia's problem because Putin, enacted a ban on Americans adopting Russian babies, Russian orphans, because that was how he retaliated against the Magnitsky Act. Now, what is the Magnitsky Act? That is what Bill Browder lobbied to have. And what it was he had hired a lawyer/forensic accountant to see why all these write-offs were showing up on his firm in Russia. And it turned out that it was Prevezon laundering money. So he went to the United States, he went to the Justice Department and asked them, could they do anything? And they said no, because, these are Russian nationals. We don't have any jurisdiction over them. But what we could do, Preet Bharara said, we could bring a civil suit. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. You're on point about everything.
Well, good, because I figured this out like days ago. And what kills me is that the two of them that were in this meeting, I mean, it seems to me that, why does Junior lie so much? I mean, what is he so afraid of if he's, going to be so transparent?
Which I try to get everybody on the same sheet of music when everyone's tearing their hair out. There are 13 financial crime investigators, the top ones in the Justice Department, now working under Rob, part of his counsel.
I can't hear you. You're breaking up. Are you on a cell phone? Hello?
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
So what I was saying was all of this and more can be explained by the 13 top financial crime investigators in the Department of Justice now working for the special counsel. They have just one team looking for spy links, but they have 13 teams looking at financial crimes related to high-value real estate. The Trump people, Jared Kushner, Donald Trump Jr., and here's a little interesting one, because before people start saying, well, Akhmenov and
Veselnitskaya.
Yeah, Veselnitskaya were, citizens, and they were just doing their thing. I just want to call attention to you that at one point there was a team of Russian spies in the United States. Mm-hmm. And the most noteworthy of them was a young woman by the name of Anna Chapman. One of the cover stories Anna Chapman had here was a high-value real estate broker. She was a Russian FSB, full-scale, non-official cover intelligence officer. The Russians so deeply invested into high-value real estate that they have these firms, these individuals, but every one of them were 1 degree of separation from Putin's intelligence agencies. And that was by design.
Do you think, is Anna Chapman still around? Is she still here in the United States? I mean...
Oh, no. She was kicked out along with 6 or 7 other spies that were captured here in the United States. And now she has a line of handbags. But most interestingly is she is like, that's not a joke. And, I wouldn't be surprised if she has, taking over a certain individual's line of handbags in Russia. But, she is now one of the top heroes of Russia. And she, whenever there's a controversy related to espionage, she comes on Russia Today and speaks in favor of Putin. Uh-huh. These people integrated near intelligence and known intelligence officers everywhere throughout the United States, and most notably in oligarchy organizations, and they laundered their dirty money in high-value real estate.
Do you think it has anything to do with Trump?
Oh, gosh, how could it possibly be? But, you asked earlier, why does Donald Trump Jr. continue to lie?
Yes.
Why did the White House, who we're now finding out through NBC exclusive reporting, that they had this information, well, and CNN as well, they had this information as early as 3 weeks ago. The Trump lawyers had this information. Therefore, they were prepared. When the first instance of it came out in the media, they crafted, along with the Trump staff on Air Force One with Trump present, a comprehensive lie about the cover story, which was, adopting Russian children. A little something I know about. I have some adopted Russian children.
Yeah, I thought you did. So I was thinking maybe Akhmenov and, Veselnitskaya, maybe they were adopted, and this is what the meeting was about.
Well, I think they were adopting some big money, and that appears to be the motivation for a lot of it.
Yeah.
And, no matter how you slice it, there was an interesting comment on Twitter today by Brett Baer of Fox News, who said, listen, this meeting would have been like if you're planning a bank robbery, but you don't actually come up with a plan and you don't actually rob a bank, there's no laws broken. And, one commenter said, no, it's conspiracy.
That's right.
Conspiracy to rob a bank. And the email was the plan to rob the bank.
Right.
Therefore, it is actually a conspiracy. And I've said this for some time. This is not going to be a deep espionage operation as much as I'd love that. And maybe some people will be linked and will be brought up, close to the Espionage Act. Mm-hmm. This is a RICO case.
Right.
Racketeering, influence, and corrupt organization case.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's what Mueller is looking into. And, here's the creepy thing about that story about that they knew, Kasowitz knew, and Alan Garten knew 3 weeks ago. These lawyers have a duty to inform their client if something new that has to do with their case emerges, so that, especially a client who talks to the public all the time. Why? Right. So why didn't they do their legal duty to tell Donald Trump about this meeting 3 weeks ago when they knew it?
Well, there's a lot of evidence building right now.
I think the answer is because they did tell him.
Yeah, they did tell him, and they were not surprised that he was not surprised. And I'm sure that will eventually come out, because now this opens a lot of people to criminal liability. Mm-hmm. White House staffers, people who may have been briefed. Mm-hmm. Not 5 minutes ago, we learned from CNN that there may have been as many as 8 people in that meeting.
It's the freaking Bolshoi Ballet.
So
I swear to God,
sorry,
it is. It's like the whole cast from Dr. Zhivago went to Trump Tower, and nobody had less than 20 consonants in their name. I can't believe that. And he tells Sean Hannity, no, that's it. It's just one woman wanted to talk about adoption, and now it turns out it's Dr. Zhivago's entire IMDb.
Yeah. Well, there you have it.
Yeah.
But it just goes to show you, this is interesting.
But I don't know why he's lying, because his father can pardon him. Why don't they just get it all out and say, yeah, we did this, and it's to cover up money laundering, because the 34% of this country that support this con man will continue to support him no matter what he does. He was correct when he said he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue, and so could Jared, and so could Trump Jr. because, quite frankly, their dad will pardon them.
Well, now you're looking at a situation where the Constitution and the laws of the United States no longer are laws. And, it's one of the founding fathers said, a nation without laws is no nation. A constitution without laws is just a piece of paper. And if we don't enforce that, if this turns out to be true, and this turns into a massive, this is beyond Watergate, way beyond.
Oh, way beyond.
Scandal.
Yes.
Well, at some point it's going to have to come to a head, and people are going to have to exercise their constitutional rights to redress. And all of this being said, we do have to place some faith in the investigatory process. Rob Mueller and his team are out there. All indications, Preet Bharara, it was fired, but his deputy was just brought on to the investigative team. So everything that he left in his lockers is still available to the special counsel. And more importantly, Preet Bharara now becomes a witness. He is not held together by all of the legal niceties that his position as a U.S. attorney would have held him to. You
know what just happened? Jamie Gorelick just dumped Jared as a client.
Wait, just now?
Yeah. Yeah, she just dumped him, and part of it was because quietly her friends were saying, "What the F are you doing, Jamie? Really, what are you doing?" Because for those of you who don't know, Jamie Gorelick was Bill Clinton's deputy attorney general, and they were like, "What are you doing?" But the other part of it was she said, that Mueller had come from Wilmer Hale, and that's her law firm, and she didn't want any chance of a conflict, so she dumped him. Now, I don't believe either of those stories. I think she's like, I can't defend this.
Well, if an attorney finds themselves in an impossible situation, they have to make the best of it. But they don't. This is a private case. They don't have to, oblige themselves.
Yeah.
Especially if it is, personally, socially distasteful or not profitable. And I certainly hope that it's not an indicator of, violation of attorney-client privilege. But as some will gladly say, as soon as this conversation is over, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, again, this is another case for putting the faith in that what I call the wood chipper of democracy. The founding fathers created this system of checks and balances, and now the special prosecutor law gives unbridled, almost unlimited power, including the power of subpoena and investigatory power, using the FBI and the intelligence community. They are afraid of the things we have not found out about. And these meetings were so damning. You have to understand that Junior may have released all that information to immunize himself to a certain extent by saying, I'm transparent, and the rest are a bunch of rats. So, I don't know. I think we should all hold on. It's only 4:25 on the East Coast, and we know news breaks at 5:30 on Friday.
Tell me about it.
10 p.m. every other day.
I know. I mean, it's unbelievable. News breaks late now in the day. Their press conferences are delayed. They're not on camera, so you got to wait. Everything happens right before my show, so I'm always frazzled at 4 o'clock Eastern because everything is breaking. And then at 5 o'clock on Friday, something breaks while I'm live. But I got to say, I don't get how this could immunize Jr. in any way. The New York Times was about to release these emails. He's lying when he tells Hannity and others, that, and he thought that would be the period at the end of the sentence, goes to Hannity and goes, that's it, you have everything, I did it to be. The New York Times was about to release all this, I guess there were 17 in the chain emails. Kushner is really the one who has the most potential in my mind to become a rat. Okay, because his dad was in jail and he knows exactly what you need to do if you want to avoid, prison. So, I don't know. I think Jared's going to be the rat.
You know what? Here's the indicator that you need to be watching for, and I say this all the time.
Okay.
Anyone that does not cooperate in the next 60 to 90 days with this investigation, as these investigatory teams start putting this giant picture together. And they're going to go for the easy fruit, right? They're going to go for the schemes in which there's a lot of documentation, or people who have already come up and have presented information. So start with Michael Flynn. If Michael Flynn is cooperating, then you will just start hearing about he's cooperating, which will, of course, make everyone else nervous. Mm-hmm. If Michael Flynn is not cooperating, or Paul Manafort, or any of them decide to stonewall the FBI and the special counsel, they will raid their homes. And they will take every computer, every document. Sometimes they do that just to make a point that if you're not cooperative, we have ways to make you as cooperative as possible. Because the raids won't just happen to Michael Flynn. They'll happen to Michael Flynn Jr., his son, as you know, who was one of his greatest advocates and spends a lot of time on the computer.
Yes, an avid retweeter is what he was of white nationalist propaganda.
So anyone who's not playing ball, they have the spectacle, the optics of having U.S. Marshals and FBI SWAT teams literally descend on their offices, bringing those big white boxes out of wheelbarrows.
Oh my God!
That is the strength of this investigation. If nothing happens in the next 90 days, I find it virtually impossible to believe. But now the FBI and the special counsel have a new line of inquiry with these Kushner emails. And that's an easy one because the emails are the evidence. And now they can say, any more of these emails in your computer? And if they get stonewalled, they'll just go get a subpoena and they'll storm someone's office. Now, Paul Manafort, can I point out that his office is on the 54th floor of Trump Tower?
Yeah.
So, those SWAT cops outside, maybe window dressing now, but they could be the seizure team later.
Oh, my God. Well, I live for that day. I mean, I want a perp walk. You mentioned Preet Bharara is going to be a witness. Remember, Preet Bharara was the attorney on the Prevezon case against Natalia, right? And against this this new Russian spy that showed up at this meeting. So when
that case was just dismissed yesterday or day before.
It's amazing. I mean, 2 days before trial, the case is just like, now let's settle it. After Sessions, after Trump fires Preet Bharara, and then Sessions is left to make the call, he goes, no, settle this thing for $6 million on a $230 million money laundering fraud case against an American, against a British citizen who complains to the American Justice Department. It makes no sense. But remember, Preet Bharara's files on Prevezon went with Preet over to Robert Mueller's office.
That's correct.
And that's a beautiful thing, because all these people that are sitting in Trump Jr.'s 25th floor office are now in this Prevezon case. They're either attorneys of record or they're lobbying to get it shut down. I mean, it's incredible. It's amazing. They know very few people. These Trumps.
Yeah, well, the wood chipper of justice. And democracy. This is what's going to happen. They're going to process all that information, and some things are going to come out whole and natural, like mulch, and other things that shouldn't go into a wood chipper are going to come out the way they should,
like dog food. Like byproducts.
Well, you cannot. You can. The what do they say? The machinery of justice. The gears are fine. And if someone thinks that they're going to come and play this game, these rules were established very early on with the emolument clause. enshrined in the Constitution. I like to say that James Madison and Thomas Jefferson were all sitting around drinking, and they said, "Hey, what if some rich guy who decides he wants to be the next George III comes into office?" And they go, "Oh no, we got to put some stops in there." Well, now you are seeing truly, for the first time in American history, a self-serving family, a royalty family, now coming up with the gears. If the Republican Party decides, as some of the Trump supporters say, that they refuse to believe empirical data, refuse to believe law enforcement, well, the laws are the law. And either they will enforce those laws or, there are ways to resolve those.
Well, I got to say, I mean, it's one thing to be a kleptocrat. It's another thing to, have meetings that involve fewer Russians than a Tolstoy novel. I mean, more Russians than a Tolstoy. I've never seen anything like this family. I really never have. And the fact that America is so slow to realize that this man is enriching himself by aligning our foreign policy with Russia and, white nationalist countries like Poland over our 50, 70-year allies like, European democracies. It's very sickening, I have to say. But I'm living for the perp walks, and now I have the raids to look forward to, so I'm very excited about that.
Randy, the number one way of redress in this country is voting. And
I agree.
I bring this to everybody's attention every time. If you have a complaint here, you don't like the way the system's being run, you didn't vote in the last election, or you did a protest vote in the last election, you chose this. And
I know
50% of the voting public did not come to the polls.
No, it's
120 million Americans.
No, it's just disgusting.
So bring someone that didn't vote in 2018, and all of this can be resolved.
But I just want to say this, Malcolm.
The way the founding fathers wanted.
Yeah, but here's the problem, and it is a problem because enough Americans don't vote as you just said, and now you've got this whole Russian operation that was able to hack into voter registration rolls and hack into the software that goes into the touch screen machines. This is a very you're a counterterrorism guy, and so you understand these things take a very, very long time to create these plans, to execute them, to try them, to stick your toe in the water, see how far you can get. They got pretty damn far. If we don't stop them, then the entire 2018, 2020 election, they have enough expertise at this point to really get in there and really flip votes, which did not happen in this election. But, they were able to target likely Hillary voters with propaganda. They were able to do dark ads on Facebook to people that were, digitally identified by the efforts of the Russians. So, honestly, we have to solve this because 2018 is just around the corner. And if the Russians have perfected this at this point, who knows what the results of the and he'll just say, our president will just say, "See, I told you the polls were wrong."
Well, like I said, it has to be unambiguous and it has to be overwhelming. So bring everybody who's listening to the sound of my voice, bring and convince a person who did not vote in the last election to the next election. Primaries, get used to voting in primaries, but make it a voting party.
Yeah.
Because that's the only way that we can do it. And the system is there. It's not rigged. The system has worked perfectly for 241 years, but you have to fight for your rights.
Yeah.
And that's why I love this country. This is an epic, and now we are in a Tolstoy novel.
Yes, we are. It's Anna Karenina, everybody. Anna Karenina. That's what we'll call Natalia from here on out. Listen, I love you. Thank you for giving me something to live for. The raids. I can't wait. And I will reach out to you the second I see a SWAT team anywhere near any of these people to thank you.
Well, thank you. You just sit there. Thanks, Randy.
You're welcome. Have a great weekend, Malcolm.
Anytime.
And thanks for your time. Malcolm Nance, everybody, the author of The Plot to Hack America, which was written way before you knew there was a plot to hack America. I would say he's pretty good at counterterrorism. I would say he's pretty good at his damn job. Now, our guys are that good. What do you think? Russians suck? You think they're terrible? You think they're bad? Now, this Afghanistan guy, he told the AP he did serve in the Soviet military in a unit that was part of counterintelligence, but he never formally trained as a spy. What, do they have a graduation and a yearbook? Never formally graduated? If they did have a yearbook, he'd be voted most likely to be outed as a spy. These people, you know, again, they're good, but we're better. We're much, much better.
For a commercial-free, on-demand, whenever, wherever listening experience, visit RandiRhodes.com for your personal premium podcast today.
Hey, do you own gold? You know, if you don't, you're in a bad position. Stocks are at an all-time high. Gold at recent lows. So maybe to you it seems like things are going great, but I can assure you if another stock market crash comes, if another 2008 happens, are you protected? I don't think so. Don't wait until after something bad happens, because then stocks fall and gold goes up. Get gold now while it's low and diversify your portfolio today. Because once you have gold in your portfolio, you can rest assured you are protected. So call my friends at ITM Trading at 1-888-OWN-GOLD. They're experts at diversifying investment portfolios with precious metals. They can help you in building a custom strategy based on your goals, your objectives. Please don't follow the herd and don't wait till it's too late. Take action today and bring safety to your financial future. Call ITM Trading today at 1-888-OWN-GOLD and speak to a precious metals expert and ask for a free gold kit. 1-888-OWN-GOLD. 1-888-OWN-GOLD.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1995. That was the day 2,500 pressmen, reporters, drivers, and clerks went out on strike against the Detroit News and the Free Press. Both newspapers had created a virtual monopoly in 1988 by merging their advertising and circulation departments into the Detroit Newspaper Association. Even as the DNA raked in record profits, they forced years of concessions, including wage freezes and layoffs. When the association implemented a merit pay raise system, the newspaper guild voted to strike. 5 other unions, including CWA and the Teamsters, soon followed. The newspapers, however, were ready. Just before the strike, they cut off the dues checkoff. They also contracted with the company Alternative Workforce to provide scabs. They also hired private security guards from Huffmaster and Vance International to enforce the scab herding. A solid union boycott cut revenues for both newspapers. On August 19th, hundreds of strikers stopped scabbing until police attacked the picket lines, breaking arms, and arresting at least 4. Then, on Labor Day weekend, thousands of strikers and supporters successfully repulsed police forces amassed from across the state to break up the picket lines. By mid-September, both newspapers were forced to airlift the Sunday edition until strike-breaking injunctions limited picket lines. Over 100 had been arrested over the course of several weeks. Unable to stop production, strikers gradually returned to work until the strike was finally called off in February of 1997. In his 2-volume set, Workers in America, Robert Weir notes that many labor activists criticized strike tactics. They argued direct action to stop production should have been the priority rather than boycotts and political pressure. Once the strike ended, the DNA claimed all but a few had forfeited their jobs.
Hello, Progressive Voices Tune-In listeners. I'm Casey Hobbs.
And I'm Shane Mason, and we're the hosts of Nurse Talk Radio.
Here's what we're talking about this week. All right, let's talk about healthcare. Is it really healthcare we're talking about, or is it something else?
There's a much wider agenda at work here than just healthcare, as we've talked about before. The Senate bill, certainly, that Mitch McConnell is trying to get 50 votes in his caucus to get passed, is really more about wealth care than it is about health care. It's got a huge tax break for the wealthiest, and yet it eviscerates so much of the Affordable Care Act and the Medicaid expansion and so many things that people now rely on to get even the most basic of health care services. What they really move to do is to gut the Affordable Care Act. They can't repeal all parts of it, but they certainly are gutting it, taking away the employer mandate that employers over a certain size provide health benefits for their employees. And by the way, there are estimates that up to 3 million people who now get coverage through employers will also be at risk of losing their coverage. So there's even more damage. 22 million people may lose their insurance coverage, in part because insurers will not be required to charge the same rates for people who are older or people who have pre-existing conditions. So, for instance, people like myself who are 62, some health issues ongoing, and a cancer survivor are really going to be in a tough spot. So that's another big problem with it. The Medicaid expansion is an enormous gut of the Affordable Care Act. Doing away with that across the country is just a horrible thing for the disabled, for the elderly.
Check out our show at nursetalksite.com and listen every Saturday and Sunday right here on Progressive Voices.
All things Randi at randyrhodes.com.
Go for launch.
Speaking truth to power, the Randi Rhodes Show.
Okay, let me introduce you to Bill Browder. Why? Because Bill Browder, you know, there's this letter from Chuck Grassley back in April 4th, 2017. The Republican, Chuck Grassley, who sits on Judiciary, okay, actually wrote a letter to the Department of Homeland Security, to John Kelly, General John Kelly, okay? That's who Donald Trump put into the Department of Homeland Security. And here's what the letter said. It's very brief, okay? But what's attached to the letter is not so brief. It's 17 pages, and I've gone through it twice, so I can explain it to you, and it's really important, okay? So here's Grassley's letter to John Kelly, the Secretary of Department of Homeland Security. He said, I write to obtain information regarding Mr. Rinat Akhmetshin, a Russian immigrant to the United States who has been accused of acting as an unregistered agent for Russian interests and apparently has ties to Russian intelligence. In July of 2016, Mr. William Browder, the CEO of Hermitage Capital Management, filed a formal complaint with the Justice Department. That's, Comey, right? 2016. Filed a formal complaint with the Justice Department alleging that Mr. Akhmetshin, among others, failed to register under the Foreign Agents Registration Act. This is called FARA, despite undertaking a lobbying campaign on behalf of Russian interests. The committee is looking into the circumstances surrounding this lobbying effort and the potential FARA violations involved. It's important for the committee to gather additional information on Mr. Akhmetshin as part of this process. Mr. Akhmetshin is a Russian immigrant to the United States who has admitted having been a, quote, Soviet counterintelligence officer. In fact, it has been reported that he worked for GRU, which is the military branch of the intelligence outfits in Russia, right? GRU, and allegedly specializes in active measures campaigns, subversive political influence operations involving disinformation and propaganda. This guy is in charge of disseminating fake news. It's what he does in political campaigns specifically. This is who's in the Trump Jr. office, okay? But there's more than that he does. According to press accounts, Mr. Akhmetshin is, quote, known in foreign policy circles as a key pro-Russian operator. Radio Free Europe described him as a, quote, Russian gun for hire who lurks in the shadows of Washington's lobbying world. Mr. Akhmetshin reportedly entered the United States in the 90s, became a U.S. citizen in 2009, while also retaining his Russian citizenship. How do you pull that off? Despite all of this information, and despite Mr. Akhmetshin's admission to the press that he had been a Russian intelligence officer, in response to a different press inquiry, Akhmetshin said he never worked for Soviet military intelligence, something he would need to declare when he applied for his U.S. citizenship. Boy, these people around Trump and Trump's kids and Trump himself and his son-in-law and everybody he does business with massive amounts of consonants in their name, they all decide to lie on their forms. It's just so fascinating. So he never declared that he was an intelligence officer when he applied for U.S. citizenship. And it says the circumstances of Mr. Akhmetshin's immigration into the U.S. and his eventual U.S. citizenship are relevant to the committee, given his alleged ties to Russian intelligence and actions as an unregistered agent of Russian interests. This information is also relevant because he was reportedly working with, now stand by everybody for news, he was reportedly working with Fusion GPS, the company that oversaw the creation of the controversial dossier alleging a conspiracy between President Trump and the Russian government. He worked with Fusion? All right, let me take this from the top. First, I'm going to introduce you to Mr. Browder, because Mr. Browder, attached to this letter that Chuck Grassley wrote, is 17 pages. And what are those 17 pages? They are a complaint. It's Bill Browder, the owner of Hermitage Capital Management. That is the company that saw their books being used for Prevezon to take write-downs to qualify them for big tax refunds right out of the Russian treasury. Then they have all this money. Now, Prevezon is a Russian government company. So Putin wanted this money taken out from the Russian people, taken from the Russian treasury, and moved into Prevezon's, moved it onto Prevezon's books, and then laundered someplace else. And of course, the money was used to buy high-value New York real estate. That much we know. We just don't know, if it was Trump. So here's Bill Browder testifying in front of Congress. This was a hearing that Congressman Royce had. Now, Congressman Royce is head of the Foreign Relations Committee in the House. Mr. Royce had a hearing about the state of affairs with Putin's Russia. And Bill Browder testified at that hearing. And here's what he said.
How do we know all this? We know it because Sergei did something very unusual. He documented it all in 450 complaints.
Okay, so let me just set this up, because I didn't realize it started right there. All right, so what he's going to be talking about is the fact that when he noticed that a company was invading his accounting and that they were taking losses on his books, he hired an attorney/forensic accountant named Sergei Magnitsky. And Sergei Magnitsky uncovered the largest Russian tax fraud in the history of Russia. And that came right out of the Russian treasury. Went to Putin's company, Prevezon, and it is a government company. It's run by, and that's Natalia's the lawyer, and it turns out so is Mr. Akhmetshin. They're lawyers for Prevezon. Isn't that something? Okay, so Sergei ends up being the one that's arrested, not anybody associated with Prevezon. Not the the father and the son that are running Prevezon for Putin, or stealing the money from the treasury away from the Russian people and then buying New York real estate so no one can trace it, right? So Sergei uncovers this. They arrest Sergei Magnitsky. Oh God, there's more Russians in this than Dostoevsky ever thought of. All right, and when he's jailed in 2009. He gets very, very ill. He gets so ill that he's on the verge of death. The Russians deny him medical care. And in fact, when he got so sick that they did transfer him to a prison that did have medical facilities, because not all their prisons do, they actually, instead of putting him in the emergency room, Sergei was tied to a gurney, and Russian officials were dispatched to his room in the hospital, in the emergency room of the medical center in the Russian prison, and they beat him to death with rubber hoses. Okay, and so here's Bill Browder, who has never, ever, ever gotten over this, okay?
How do we know all this? We know it because Sergei did something very unusual. He documented it all in 450 complaints in his 358 days in detention. And as a result of that, we have the most well-documented human rights abuse and extrajudicial killing case in the history of Russia. Now, this is a tragic case and a heartbreaking case for me and his family and for anyone around him. But the reason why this is politically significant is not what they did to him. This happens all the time. It's the cover-up that the government embarked on afterwards. The Russian government, on the day he died, said he died of natural causes. They weren't aware that he was ill. They've since exonerated all of the police officers, Interior Ministry officials, prosecutors, and judges from any liability. Some of them have been promoted, some of them have been given state honors. To add insult to injury, instead of prosecuting anyone who did this to him, they're now prosecuting Sergei himself. 2.5 years after his death, they're now prosecuting Sergei Magnitsky for the trumped-up crimes they arrested him for in the first ever posthumous prosecution in Russian history. Not even Stalin did that. Oh. It's clear that there's no possibility of justice in Russia for Sergei's case or many, many other cases like it. And as a result, I've sought justice outside of Russia. And in 11 parliaments around the world that are now considering visa sanctions and asset freezes on the people who killed Sergei Magnitsky, as well as other gross human rights abusers. And most significantly, this Congress is also considering the same thing. I would argue that in the absence of any possibility of justice in these cases, that something needs to be done, and that's the thing that needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for that powerful testimony.
That's your friend Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, who took that testimony from Bill Browder. Maybe this is why she's retiring. I don't know. Maybe she knows entirely too much about this and can't defend Trump, or can't, could be the right time for her to leave, because she is retiring, and she is a congresswoman from Miami, and she took that testimony from Bill Browder. Now, here's what Bill Browder was trying to do there. He was trying to get our Congress to pass something called the Magnitsky Laws. And that would then put sanctions on anybody who had anything to do with the death of Sergei Magnitsky and the money laundering, the theft of the $230 million out of the Russian treasury, anybody associated with Prevazon, anybody associated with, the killing, the prosecutors, the police officers who beat him to death in prison. Everybody in that group would be forbidden from entering the United States and, of course, doing business in the United States. These sanctions that Bill Browder was successful in getting enacted by our Congress, the Magnitsky Laws, are exactly what Akhmechin and Veselnitskaya and others were lobbying our government to overturn. In fact, there was a movie that was screened at the museum just days after the junior meeting, okay? Veselnitskaya, now we know Akhmechin, they're all in the office with a translator and with a representative. These are the A people, okay? The A people are Jared, Jr., Manafort, Veselnitskaya, Akhmechin, a translator, a representative for the Agararilov family. Who are the Agararilovs? They're the Donald Trumps of Russia. Okay, they're oligarchs too. Emin, is a dancing pop star. He wants to be Justin Timberlake of Kazakhstan, I guess. And then the fat bastard was in there. Okay, so it was catered on top of it. Now I'm trying to do some research into this translator because I think that might be an interesting person to look into, but. Make a long story, very long, nice and sharp and clean and easy to, ever since Bill Browder was successful in getting the Magnitsky Laws, Russia has been lobbying our government to overturn them. They went as far as to make a fake movie, kind of like Clinton Cash or the Clinton Diaries, or, all those fake movies about the Clintons, where they had murder lists and they were killing people and Vince Foster was having an affair and she killed him, all that crap, okay? So Russia took a little note from us and said, hey, let's make a fake movie. They made a movie that actually alleges that Bill Browder killed Sergei Magnitsky himself, and that Bill Browder really is the embezzler, that he's the one that stole the $230 million from the Russian treasury. Now, that is so ridiculous, nobody buys it. But, Washington being Republican and all, they actually had a screening of this movie at the museum in Washington, D.C., 2 days after the same people who made the movie are in Donald Trump Jr.'s office. Their goal was to rewrite the Magnitsky story to say that Browder embezzled the $230 million, killed Magnitsky. Now, Akhmetshin and Veselnitskaya, they both worked with the producers of this movie, who was also, you know how they say, oh, well, she was at one of these hearings. That was the Royce hearing. She was at that hearing, and so was he. So was he, because they were lobbying Congress. And you'll never believe, a former congressman took them all around Capitol Hill, introduced them to all the Republican congressmen. Okay, that's number one. Number two, brought them into this hearing that Congressman Royce held at the Foreign Relations Committee, sat them down right behind Robert McFall, or I don't know, is Robert McFall, our former ambassador to Russia, who was testifying, and that's what you see is them say. Now, how did they get into those meetings? Dana Rohrabacher and this former congressman, who's now a lobbyist, brought them into, and of course, Fox News is saying, Loretta Lynch let her in. Loretta Lynch, no, it was Republican congressmen that invited him in. And that's why they're at this hearing. Now, the other interesting part is this Fusion part, right? That's the company that Chris Steele worked for. And Chris Steele, as you know, was a former MI6 officer, and he created that dossier on Trump. Well, here's what happened. Prevezon, for whom both Natalia and Akhmetshin worked for as, attorneys, they hired Fusion to represent Prevezon in the United States. They hired Glenn Simpson, who is a former Wall Street Journal reporter who started Fusion GPS. And they hired him to lobby the Congress on overturning these Magnitsky Laws on behalf of Prevezon. My little theory is maybe what Glenn Simpson of Fusion GPS started to find about Prevezon, about Bill Browder, about, the embezzlement. Maybe it was so unbelievable to him and so bizarre, and Trump was already now running for president, and maybe he was able to connect all the dots, and that prompted him to hire Chris Steele to do an investigation into Donald Trump. Now, Chris Steele found so much horrible, he said his hair was on fire, right? So much hair-raising crap about Donald Trump when he wrote this dossier, never mind the PP tape, but all this crap about Felix Sater and Russian operatives around him all the time. And, it's just like amazing. They don't know anybody that has, less than 19 consonants in their name. What is the deal with this family? So I'm thinking that that Glenn Simpson of Fusion hires Chris Steele to do this opposition research on Trump while he's representing Prevezon. Now, they're not lawyers, okay? One's a counterintelligence guy for MI6, and the other one is a Wall Street Journal reporter who starts this opposition research company. So it seems to me that what he was finding was scaring the bejesus out of him. Either that, or... You remember how they said that Chris Steele was first hired by the GOP to do opposition research on Trump? Who could that have been? So I'm thinking the client that hired Fusion is Bill Browder. And that Bill Browder knew that there was a Russian effort to overturn the sanctions that were placed upon Russia as a result of Sergei Magnitsky's death, which obviously is something near and dear to his heart. He wrote a whole book about it, and he hired Fusion. And Fusion then said, we're finding a lot of crap about Prevezon. Bill Browder was the guy that was ripped off. Listen, I'm going to hire a former MI6 guy. I'm going to put him on the case. He's going to figure out what's going on here because you won't believe we think Prevezon was laundering money through Donald Trump. Donald Trump is running for president. Yes, we'll do the opposition research. And he reached out to Chris Steele, the former MI6 officer, to do it. Now, it does turn out that Prevezon was controlled by the Russian government and was under investigation by none other than Preet Bharara for money laundering that went through Bill Browder's company. And of course, Donald Trump becomes president, and what's the first thing he does? He fires Preet Bharara. But Preet Bharara has the file, and that entire file has been given to Robert Mueller. I would bet my last dollar on that. So Malcolm Nance is correct. This is a RICO Act case.
Clear for takeoff. Randi Rhodes Air Force. Air Force. RandiRhodes.com.
Now, the top of the hour on the Progressive Voices channel on TuneIn presents the Green News Report.
Ice shelves there and elsewhere around Antarctica are really kind of the canaries in the coal mine.
Iceberg the size of Delaware finally breaks off of Antarctica.
The system will be 3 times more powerful than any system on Earth.
Tesla will build the world's biggest battery in 100 days, or it's free. Trump's EPA moves to revive the controversial Pebble Mine in Alaska. Plus, France moves to phase out coal and the internal combustion engine.
All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Ever since the last ice age ended about 40,000 years ago, we've been warming ever since then. So we're continuing, and the Earth goes through these cycles where we cool and we warm, and that's what we are right now. We're on a warming trend.
Hey, James Quinones, weatherman from KPNX in Phoenix. Why don't you learn what the hell you're talking about before you go on the air and misinform Phoenix? This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, Phoenix just went through one of their worst heat waves ever, and you've got weathermen either not explaining what's going on to the people of Phoenix or just lying to them like James Quinones. Sorry, it makes me really angry.
Yeah, I can tell.
I'm not even a weatherman, but I try to learn what the hell I'm talking about before I say it. Anyway, what do you have for us today in the Green News Report?
Well,
don't screw it up.
Well, one of the largest icebergs ever recorded just broke free from Antarctica. According to British scientists and NASA satellite images, the much-watched, fast-growing crack across the massive Larsen C ice shelf finally broke off sometime between Monday and Wednesday, calving an iceberg the size of Delaware, more than 600 feet deep, containing enough ice to cover all 50 states in more than 4 inches of ice. It's so big that maps of Antarctica will have to be revised. It won't raise sea levels by itself because the ice shelf was already sitting in the water, but its loss will likely accelerate the slide of land ice behind it into the sea. It's a further sign that Antarctica's ice sheets are destabilizing.
Now, there is some controversy about whether this would have happened with or without global warming. Is there anything definitive yet either way?
As of now, there's no consensus. There's disagreement among scientists, but it is consistent with what they've predicted.
So when there's no facts to support something, we don't claim there is. At the same time, when there are facts to support something, we don't lie about it to the public. James Quinones, weatherman of KPNX in Phoenix.
Meanwhile, the Environmental Protection Agency is taking a first step in reviving the controversial proposed Pebble Mine in Alaska's Bristol Bay watershed. That's despite overwhelming opposition from residents, tribes, environmental groups, and the commercial fishing industry, and despite being rejected by the Obama administration on the grounds that the mine's toxic waste would harm the world's largest salmon fishery. The EPA has opened up a new public comment period for folks to weigh in on whether they think that mine should go forward.
Well, poisoning the food supply is one thing. Making money is another. Keep your priorities straight, Ms. Doyen.
In Australia, Tesla CEO Elon Musk is making good on his offer to build the world's biggest battery for the province of South Australia.
Cool.
South Australia suffered massive blackouts earlier this year after a tropical storm downed power lines, and Australia's conservative leadership falsely blamed that on renewable energy. Musk has now signed a contract to build a $50 million battery system in 100 days, or it's free. In a press conference, Musk said he made the bet to prove the concept.
And to prove that the people who were blaming renewable energy were wrong.
There was really this opportunity to make a significant statement about renewable energy to the world, to show that you can really do a heavy-duty, large-scale utility-level battery system.
In China, a rural province served as a real-world testing ground to prove that it is possible to switch to 100% renewable energy on a regional scale. For a full week in mid-June, 6 million people in a rural region in northwest China used only renewable energy, hydroelectric, wind, and solar power for all of their electricity needs. It was an amount equivalent to burning more than 500,000 tons of coal. The test reportedly came off without a hitch, with no grid reliability issues and without all the pollution. Finally, France has announced it will phase out all internal combustion engines by 2040. It's part of a new series of energy measures unveiled by French President Emmanuel Macron to make his country carbon neutral by 2050. France will also stop granting licenses for new oil and gas exploration and will phase out coal for generating electricity by 2022.
Wow, the rest of the world is doing some fascinating things when it comes to renewable energy.
Yes, they are.
Thank you very much. For more on all of these stories and the many that we didn't have time.
Mary had a little man. The fault.
We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream today. Change has come to America.
Believe it.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
Hey! It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind.
As far as my son is concerned, my son is a wonderful young man.
Over the course of 7 days, a head-snapping series of statements. Story number one, there were no contacts with Russians and the Putin regime during the campaign.
It's absurd, and there's no base to it.
I have nothing to do with Russia. To the best of my knowledge, no person that I deal with does.
But last Saturday, the New York Times reports there was a meeting on June 9th, 2016. Story number two. A meeting did occur with a Russian person. Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort all attended.
It was a very short meeting. It was a meeting apparently about Russian adoption. And after about 20 minutes, the meeting ended, and that was the end of it.
Later that Sunday, the New York Times reports that Donald Trump Jr. took the meeting after being promised damaging information on Hillary Clinton. Story number three.
The comments this woman were making about any type of information on Hillary Clinton were vague. They were meaningless. Others exited the meeting very quickly.
Then on Tuesday, with the New York Times ready to publish the email exchange, Donald Trump Jr. tweets it himself, including a June 3rd email offering, quote, information that would incriminate Hillary and her dealings with Russia and would be very useful to your father. The meeting's broker, publicist Rob Goldstone, adding, this is obviously very high level and sensitive information, but is part of Russia and its government's support for Mr. Trump. Trump Jr. responds, if it's what you say, I love it, especially later in the summer. Tuesday night, story number four.
For me, this was opposition research. They had something, maybe concrete evidence to all the stories I'd been hearing about, but they were probably underreported for, years, not just during the campaign. So I think I wanted to hear it out, but really, it went nowhere.
And in Paris, President Trump tries to justify the idea of campaign meetings with Russians, contact he has denied for months.
I think from a practical standpoint, most people would have taken that meeting. It's called opposition research.
Donald Trump Jr. promises the whole story is now out.
I'm more than happy to be transparent about it, and I'm more than happy to cooperate with everyone.
So as far as you know, as far as this incident is concerned, this is all of it.
This is everything. This is everything.
But it isn't everything, not even in regard to this single meeting. Over the next 3 days, the number of participants in this meeting multiplies. NBC learns that in addition to the Kremlin-connected lawyer, a former counterintelligence officer turned lobbyist, Rinat Akhmetshin, was also there. And there was a translator present. And some Republicans on Capitol Hill are losing patience.
It's serious, and this is a serious situation and one that is a long way from over.
Give him fake briefings.
What does that even mean?
It means they'll tell him stuff. He won't know the difference.
And what is our last week our dim bulb president traveled to the City of Lights. You understand that one of the most beautiful cities in the world. He went there. So turd meet punch bowl. It was just an amazing thing. But the weekend tweets when he got back, I mean, the first tweet was 6:30 a.m. on Saturday morning. Either he wakes up angry or someone pees in his Wheaties. And I'm guessing it would be a Russian hooker. I cannot believe how he wakes up. Who gets up that early so angry? I mean, it is either that or he stays up all night, just snorting, smoking, and screaming. I don't know what he's shooting. I don't know what he's doing. Everybody, oh, no, drug-free. Why? Because his doctor, remember the doctor? And his wife, get the hell out of here! And, the doctor, let Donald Trump write his own health report. And everybody says he doesn't do drugs. He doesn't do drugs. You want to say a lot of things about it, but even the people who, didn't like him, when I would talk to them or interview them, they would say, no, he really doesn't do drugs. Well, let me tell you something. Maybe not. But when he starts, like at 6:30 in the morning, he is not unwinding from a long trip to Paris. He is unraveling every single morning, this guy. And he's tweeting about the Hillary stuff again, about Hillary, got the questions to the debate with Bernie. What year was that? It's not anger. It's like Twitter Tourette's syndrome or something, I mean, it's so unbelievable. He also brought up the 33,000 missing emails. Oh, Rico Suave, check yourself. This is not a good story for you anymore. These emails and the hacking of them is not her problem anymore. It's now yours. So, stop. This story is more of a problem now for him than it ever was for Hillary Clinton. I mean, it's unbelievable. And then he tweets, fake news is, and in all caps, because he's angry. He's angry. Maybe he needs a Movantic moment. Maybe he's all backed up. I don't know. Maybe you should call Frank at the construction site and ask Frank, what doctor did you see? And she said, hey, don't keep it all inside. Gotta have a Movantic moment and just, get it all out. Just spew. But he puts in all caps, fake news is distorting democracy in our country. Donald Trump is saying that. I mean, he always capitalizes the really ironic parts. And speaking of irony, do you know what this week is? Not that it will be this, but they've named it. They have named it, the White House has, in an effort to distract you. Like last week he went to Paris, right? And tried to distract you. That did not work. It did not work. And this week they're trying to distract you with, hey, everybody, it's Made in America week. This presidency wasn't even made in America. Stop it. Stop it now.
Now, you endorsed Governor Romney.
I did.
Are you in contact with him all the time?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. What do you guys talk about?
Just general. I tell you what, he has a stance on China, which is a country that's just ripping our heart out. I mean, we just do nothing to protect ourselves, that I really like.
As a line of clothing. Now, where were these made?
These were made, I don't know where they were made, but they were made someplace. But they're great. It's ties, shirts, cufflinks, everything sold at Macy's, and they're doing great. #1 selling tie anywhere in the world.
#1 selling tie anywhere in the world. You wouldn't wear that shirt?
We also have them in white and beautiful white.
Where are the shirts made? Bangladesh.
Well, that's good. Okay. We employ people in Bangladesh.
Ties? Where are the ties
they
made?
Have to work
These are
too.
beautiful ties.
They are great ties.
The ties are made in where? China? Ties are made in China.
I miss Dave.
I'll tell you, and you know what, David, in all fairness, I've been very open about that, and not all of them, by the way, but I've been very open about that. Are you okay? Is the
no,
chair
I'm
was
fine.
Made in China.
I know.
The chair was made in China.
Was made in China.
But you know, the fact is, because of the manipulation of the currency, of their currency, when you go out, it's very hard to get product that isn't made in China.
Well, now listen. Here's what the deal is. Let's do this.
How do you like that?
I think they're beautiful, absolutely beautiful, and I don't really have a problem with helping people who need a job. I would like people in this country to get first preference, but
I agree. 100%. You buy that at Macy's, by the way.
Let's just shut down the Donald Trump factory in Beijing.
I would love to.
And we'll put up a tie factory in Jamaica, Queens.
I love it.
And we'll make the Donald Trump ties.
I'm for it.
Shut the fuck up, Donnie.
Seriously. I mean, the man just, if his lips are moving, he's freaking lying. It's just an amazing thing. So here's the theme for this week, as the White House would like it to be: made in America. And as we all know, most of his products are made in Mexico and China by people he has labeled rapists and crooks. Okay, it's just, they don't put that part on the label. I saw David Letterman looking really, really close to see if they put that on the label. No, they don't. But, it's so funny. But some of these things, are made in Indonesia, and they are a very, very Muslim country. So his stuff is actually made by the tiny little hands of baby terrorists, that just take the stitching so fine because their hands are so teeny. Virtually everything Donald Trump makes are made in places that Donald Trump supporters cannot find on a map. But then again, they can't find America on a map or afford his products. So can you really blame them? But we went and got a complete list, okay? Just so you know. The apparel, the ties, the suits, the dress shirts, the eyeglasses, and other accessories. China, Bangladesh, Honduras. It's Honduras, not Honduras. Porque en español no haces nunca. No H's. Nunca. China, Bangladesh, Honduras, Vietnam. Some of the sports coats are made in India. The shipment of the shirts, there was a shipment of shirts that actually the Clinton campaign ordered. They ordered them. And that shipment was marked as made in South Korea. And then the Trump suits on Amazon said either made in the USA or both. Okay, both. The suits, though, that they ordered, they actually, BuzzFeed ordered them. A whole bunch of investigative journalists ordered these things to see how they would come. The suits were made in Indonesia. Now, I think Indonesia is also, one of the biggest Muslim countries in the world. So, but BuzzFeed had purchased the same suit, and theirs came from Mexico, and the tie came from China. And the suit that they got had a Made in Mexico label. And then a photo of one shirt that was taken, like the one David Letterman held up, that one was made in Bangladesh. So, and the eyeglasses were made in China. The cufflinks do not list the source. If you look them up on Amazon, they don't list the source. But he actually has a cologne called Success by Trump. Anybody in this audience that wants to smell like Donald Trump, I will buy you Success by Donald Trump, but you have to wear it. You have to wear it everywhere, all the time. But that fragrance was manufactured in the United States. So that's good. And his hats, okay, for this ridiculous campaign of his, Make America Great Again, those were made in the USA. But then he's got his home items, right? He's got chandeliers and mirrors. Ooh, I wonder if the mirrors, when you look in them, if you see the devil, I wonder. Or maybe you can't see it. Maybe he looks in the mirrors, he can't see his reflection. That would explain his hair. Because the devil can't see his reflection, according to Al Pacino in Devil's Advocate. No, really. So he's got chandeliers, mirrors, bedding, table lamps, cabinets, sofas, bar stools, cocktail tables, and more. Those are made in Turkey. But according to Furniture Today, a magazine, some of the pieces of the furniture were made in Germany, the brass and the stainless pieces mostly. The hotel items were made in China or Taiwan, South Korea. The shampoo, baby wash, moisturizers, shower caps, laundry bags, shower bags, pet collars, pet leashes, and bath towels are all made in China. Okay, 12 countries is where he manufactures all of his stuff. But we do have great news. Last week, while the dim bulb was in the City of Lights, quietly, CREW, the Center for Responsibility and Ethics, the National Security Archive, and Knight First Amendment Institute quietly won their lawsuit to obtain and make public the visitor logs from Mar-a-Lago. We'll talk to the vice chair of Crew next.
For a commercial-free, on-demand, whenever, wherever listening experience, visit RandiRhodes.com for your personal premium podcast today.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History.
Do you know for
On this day in labor history, the year was 1934. The Teamster members of Local 574 in Minneapolis were back out on strike. Their strike had begun 2 months prior on May 16th. The striking Teamsters had effectively shut down much of the commercial transportation in the city. One exception was made for some farmers who were allowed to bring their produce to market. The powerful Citizens Alliance, created to oppose and destroy unions, tried to defeat the strike. The police clashed violently with the strikers, who tried to keep scab drivers from breaking through their picket lines. As the strike entered its second week, other unions began to strike in support of the Teamsters. Clashes between the police and workers intensified. Minneapolis labor leaders sat down with the police and proposed a truce. The governor of Minnesota, Floyd Olson, helped to arbitrate an agreement. The Teamsters won union recognition and the right for all strikers to return to work, as well as a system of recognizing seniority. On May 25th, they called off the strike and went back to work. But soon the employers began to backpedal on the agreement. They claimed that the negotiations did not include the workers inside warehouses and only covered those who drove and unloaded vehicles. Angered, the Teamsters went back out on strike. Soon, violent clashes between the picketers and police broke out again. 2 workers were shot in the back and killed. The governor declared martial law and sent in the National Guard to restore order. A federal mediator brokered another settlement meeting the major demands of the union. It was a major victory for the Teamsters and a major victory for the workers of Minneapolis and beyond. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
This is the voice of the resistance. You're listening to the Progressive Voices Network.
Dear fellow progressive, these are the times that try men's souls. It is not the first time our country has been in peril, and it won't be the last. It is, however, a unique threat from within, one the precise likes of which we have never seen before. It is our modern media mix that has enabled an incurious, unserious, pathological liar and textbook narcissist to accede to the highest office in the land. His is a world of make-believe, one that could only have been concocted by a student of reality TV. At least we know he studied something. The imagined slights, the trumped-up, pun intended, feuds, the insulting nicknames, the Twitter diarrhea, it is all of a piece. Entertaining, funny even in another context, but when you're busy blowing up the country's longest-running foreign relationships, devastating the environment, threatening trade wars, and embracing all the wrong actors, it's really hard to find the humor. At Progressive Voices, we take holding the powerful accountable as our most serious mission, and there is nothing more important to us today than making sure the PV audience is informed with unbiased information and that more and more people become part of our audience, and therefore are better informed than they can be by relying solely on the mainstream media, which, in so many ways, has shrunk from its duty as the watchdog of democracy. It is our sincere hope that you will help us in this important mission at this most critical hour. Go to progressivevoices.com and make your donation today. Please give whatever you can. Remember, we are a tax-exempt 501c3, meaning that your donations are fully tax-deductible. Thanks for supporting the Progressive Voices Network.
Hi, it's Randi Rhodes. Listen to me on the PV live stream or on demand or both on the PV app. Just go to progressivevoices.com or download the Progressive Voices app.
All things Randi at RandiRhodes.com.
Go for launch.
Speaking truth to power, the Randi Rhodes Show.
Do you know for sure everyone who was at that meeting with Donald Trump Jr.?
No, I don't represent Donald Trump Jr., and I do not know everyone for sure that was at that meeting. And the president was not at the meeting. I can tell you he was not there. The president wasn't aware of the meeting and did not attend it.
Doesn't it show intent and willingness on the part of Don Jr. and Jared and Paul Manafort to collude with the Russians? And let me just point out, Natalia Veselnitskaya was not just some Russian off the street. She had close ties to people in the Kremlin.
Well, number one, if the discussion was going to be about, if it was going to be about Russian opposition research that a Russian lawyer had, those goes on. You know that goes on in campaigns all the time. Opposition research is a big part of campaigning.
It doesn't go on with the Russians all the time, Jay.
Well, no, but look, here's what happened. First of all, nothing happened.
Isn't it also important whether or not it's legal, whether or not it's wrong, whether or not it's ethical?
Well, you're conflating, Jake, three perspectives here. The legality, was the meeting and what took place legal or not? We, of course, and as almost every legal expert said, it's not illegal. And then you're trying to put a moral, ethical aspect to it, and it's easy to do that in 20/20 hindsight, but not when you're in the middle of a campaign.
All right, there's Jay Sekulow, everybody, a guy who runs a charity that pays his family very heavily. But okay, we can talk about him another day. Great news for us, though. Last week, while Dim Bulb was in the City of Lights, Crew and the National Security Archive and Knight First Amendment Institute quietly won their lawsuit to obtain and make public the Mar-a-Lago visitor logs. Now, we hope the White House logs will be next. Richard Painter is an ethics watchdog who did 2 years, and I say did 2 years as if it were prison because he knows how I feel about the Bush White House, before becoming a professor of corporate law at the University of Minnesota Law School. And he's also, in his busy schedule, he fits in being the vice chair of Crew. So please welcome to the show, Richard Painter. Hello, Professor.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on the show.
Well, you know, we love you around here. We just think that you are, a voice in the wilderness. So you saw, congratulations, by the way, on the work that Crew is doing. I hope the White House logs will be next.
Well, I hope so, too. We ought to find out who's going in and out of there, whether they're Russian agents or whoever else it is. Yeah,
well, Chris Wallace said it's not just some Russian off the street. Now, why is it every time you think of Trump and Russian women, you think of hookers? I don't know. It's a crazy thing. But, okay, so they tried to make this meeting in the office about a woman and adoption. And now it turns out there were more Russians in that room than the entire company of the Bolshoi Ballet.
Well, yes. It sounds like Vladimir Putin has adopted himself a presidential candidate who won. I mean, that's what this is all about. We all know that. They wanted to get rid of those sanctions the Obama administration imposed on Russia. And so they decided they got stuff on Hillary Clinton through computer hacking and espionage and the rest of it. And then I guess they had gotten their goods on Hillary and they wanted to meet with the Trump people and see what kind of deal they could work out. And you had the top three people from the Trump team there. This wasn't just some woman off the street. I mean, they got the top three people in the campaign. And they say that President Trump himself didn't attend, but then they start bringing up the Secret Service. I mean, the only reason the Secret Service had anything to do with it would be if they were thinking of having Trump attend, because he's the only one who had Secret Service protection at the time. So I don't know what's going on. They've got about 5 different stories of what was going on, but it's pretty clear it was a pretty big deal when you have the top brass in the campaign meeting with a Russian.
Yeah, I mean, it's stunning. It really is. And yes, you're right. Jay Sekulow, again, that brilliant, piece of lawyering, said, I wonder why the Secret Service, if this was nefarious, why the Secret Service allowed these people in to Junior's Russia meeting. The Secret Service is supposed to protect you. They are, let's say, the sword, but not the shield. Okay, they just physically protect. And Donald Trump Jr. was not under Secret Service protection. He was not a protectee at the time. Why do they sit there and make this stuff up that's so easily debunkable? The Secret Service put out a letter over the weekend and said that Donald Trump Jr. was not a protectee of the USSS in June 2016. Thus, we would not have screened anyone he was meeting with at that time. So apparently,
well, that's true. That's true. But I am very they ought to clarify that Trump wasn't at this meeting. I know they say that Donald Trump Sr. wasn't at the meeting, but they brought up the Secret Service, and the only reason the Secret Service would have been involved in that meeting would have been if they were thinking of having Donald Trump Sr. attend the meeting. So if that were the case, then they would run the names of the attendees, I would think, by the Secret Service, because he was a candidate under Secret Service protection, and you can't have any old Russian come in and meet with him. I guess they got to be screened by the Secret Service. But that's what troubles me. Why did they bring up the Secret Service if Trump had nothing to do with the meeting? Trump Sr.
It is interesting. And, there are rumors, and I don't really, traffic in them, but there are rumors, and it could, come out on Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock like everything else does, that Donald Trump was on the phone and that he called in to see how they were doing. We'll just have to wait. But, okay, let's go back to that legal, pillar of the community, Jay Sekulow. He says that there are no laws that have been broken. Now, you would know better than I do about the federal election laws and a thing of value and all this. He said most legal experts that he's talked to agree that there was no statute violated. Do you agree with that?
Well, first of all, I don't want to blame him. I mean, he's a criminal defense attorney, and I think all of them need good criminal defense attorneys, and I think the president should have a good criminal defense attorney right now. And they always say their client didn't violate the law. That's what they always say. It's a pretty weak case they didn't violate the law because, first of all, the campaign finance rules prohibit coordination with any outside group, even in a group of Americans. If you coordinate with a group other than the campaign, you can get in trouble under the campaign finance laws because these outside groups aren't supposed to be picking up your work for you. They can advocate and dump on Hillary all they want, but they can't do your opposition research for you, or you end up violating the campaign finance laws. And then on top of that, we have an additional prohibition on foreign contributions to campaigns. And these are a bunch of Russians. They're not Americans, a bunch of Russians. And they say they dug up the dirt on Hillary. So that is it's a clear problem under campaign finance laws. And then on top of that, you have the fact that the way the Russians get dirt on people is through espionage and computer hacking. So probably they should have figured out that whatever the Russians had was probably illegally obtained. And that's a criminal offense to start taking possession of stolen computer files, just like taking possession of child pornography. It's a criminal offense. And why would any sane person have anything to do with this meeting unless they wanted to get arrested?
It's so bizarre. I mean, this is like, it's not even about espionage here, although the hacking, is, part of it. But it seems like a RICO statute violation. It seems like a conspiracy. It seems like this is what Mueller is looking into, money laundering, conspiracy to commit. This does not seem as much about espionage as originally thought, does it?
Well, we don't know. We know the Russians have been conducting spying operations in the United States really since the 1917 Russian Revolution, and they've been trying to destabilize Western democracies for the past 100 years, too, and they never got very far in the United States until they discovered the far right wing of our political spectrum. But, I think it's pretty clear they did a lot of computer hacking of DNC and Clinton and the rest of it. And when you agree to meet with the Russians to get dirt on your opponent, you're making a pact with the devil here. They're going to give you stolen documents, put you in jeopardy of a criminal offense, and they're trying to accomplish the objectives of their own government, which is to destabilize our election. I don't see how any rational politician who didn't want to end up being criminally charged would have anything to do with a meeting like this.
So compare this to the Fox News slant that, they're trying to deflect and say Hillary and had a consultant who was an American girl who was of Ukrainian descent, so am I, and that she had gone to the Ukrainian embassy and she was trying to dig up dirt on Manafort because Manafort was not registered as a foreign lobbyist, but she knew that he had been lobbying for Viktor Yanukovych, the pro-Russian dictator of Ukraine. Is it the same?
Well, no. I mean, I'm not going to defend everything that Hillary Clinton speaks.
Me neither.
I think
no,
they got
me neither.
themselves in all sorts of jams. But here we have some operative working for the Clinton campaign and may have been cutting some corners to try and go dig up dirt on somebody.
Mm-hmm.
That's very different than the top three people at the Trump campaign agree to meet with a Russian agent after having been told that the Russian government wanted to throw the election in favor of Donald Trump and wanted to deliver damaging information on Hillary Clinton. This is a clear coordination between the very top people in the campaign and the Russian government and its agents. That's different than some campaign worker who is running off doing something they shouldn't be doing. And I think the Clintons cut a lot of corners and looked the other way. And I've definitely got my problems with the Clinton operation. But they really, the Clinton people are the junior varsity team when it comes to the corruption and quite frankly, betrayal of the United States here to a foreign power. This is a very, very serious situation. And quite frankly, I'm getting old tired of hearing about Clinton. Every time this president gets in trouble, he's going to be talking about Clinton. And regardless of what you think about President Bush, at least he didn't, whenever people got in trouble, start talking about, well, Al Gore, this, that, and the other thing.
Yeah.
You know, you win the election, you're president, do a decent job, and quit trying to blame everything on the person you beat in the election.
Yeah, I mean, and the idea that they floated this story about adoption, I mean, how stupid do they have to be? You know, most people who are paying attention to this story understand the Magnitsky Act, and they understand that the sanctions that were put on Russia after Magnitsky was tortured and killed and beaten in jail and died. He was a forensic accountant for Mr. William Browder, who had Hermitage investment fund in Russia. It's a longer story than that, but suffice it to say, Browder lobbied Congress hard for a Magnitsky Law. Those were sanctions on people in Russia that commit human rights abuses. And the retaliation for those laws was Putin banning American adoption. So when they say it was about adoption, it was a woman who came to talk about adoption. Adoption is Putin's issue. You know, they had to have been talking about sanctions, and the adoption ban was maybe something she was offering as a quid pro quo. Take the sanctions off, we'll let the adoptions go through, because there's nothing we can do to create a pathway for Americans to adopt Russians without Putin saying, okay, that's what's going to happen. So why did they even go down that adoption road? It made everybody look at Magnitsky.
Yeah, it was code because the adoption thing is so tied up in the sanctions.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, we know full well what both sides of this deal wanted. The Trump people wanted the dirt on Hillary Clinton.
Right.
And wanted the Russians to figure out a way to disseminate that without the Trump people getting tagged for it. And that's why I think ultimately the decision was made that the Russians would leak it to WikiLeaks rather than hand it over to the Trump people.
Right.
I think that's what the deal was on that side. And what the Russians wanted was that the sanctions would be lifted. And, of course, as soon as the sanctions are lifted, the adoption ban would be lifted by Putin. But neither side gave a hoot about the adoption.
Right.
That's a joke that Donald Trump, that his team would spend 1 minute worrying about Russian adoption, or that Putin, I don't think, gives a hoot about adoption.
No,
it's about
no.
The sanctions and the dirt on Hillary.
Yes, of course, and it was such a silly thing to say the meeting was about, because everybody who is involved in adopting children from Russia, and there are plenty of people who understand this thing and when it stopped and why it stopped. Some people were mid-adoption, and that, you know, you say that we were talking about Russian adoption, and everybody who was involved in trying to adopt a Russian orphan, they all know it was the Magnitsky Law. So why, which was sanctioned. So. Yeah. Right? I mean,
it's a lawyer game. It's a lawyer game. In other words, technically it's about adoptions because adoptions are part of the issue involving the sanctions.
Right.
And, you know, so technically you could say it's about adoptions. I bet they didn't use the word adoptions for 1 minute in that meeting.
Right.
Because it's the sanctions that the Russians care about. But technically you can play games that way and say, well, we were talking about baloney. We know it's about sanctions, lifting the sanctions in return for throwing the election in favor of Donald Trump. It's a quid pro quo deal. and they're trying to figure out how to do the deal so Putin's fingerprints aren't too close to it, and Trump certainly aren't too close to it. And I think that's what was going on there.
His DNA is all over it. That's his son taking that meeting.
Oh, yeah, big time.
Hey, do you know Walter Schaub Jr.?
Oh, yes, he's a great man. He was the one of the top lawyers of the Office of Government Ethics when I was in the Bush White House, and he helped us get a lot of the ethics work done for our nominees. And he was since then appointed by President Obama to be the head of the Office of Government Ethics. He's a really solid guy, did a great job there at OGE, but he got into a spat with the Trump administration because the Trump White House doesn't want to follow the ethics rules, and basically wrote him a letter saying the ethics rules don't apply to the White House staff. And then he told President Trump that he ought to divest himself of his assets to create conflicts of interest.
That's right.
He was told to pound sand over that. So he finally got fed up with his nonsense, quit. But he left only 6 months early. His term would have expired anyway, and President Trump would not have renominated him.
Well, I think his resignation was a very, very good statement. I think it was a strong statement, and I think he resigned. For those of you who don't know, Walter Schaub resigned. He is the top ethics watchdog in the White House, okay? He works in the Office of Government Ethics. Didn't you work there, too? Yeah.
No, I was the lawyer, the chief White House
to the president
in the White House. The Office of Government Ethics is actually down the street and supervises the entire executive branch ethics operations. It does not report to the White House. Obviously, the president is in charge of the executive branch, so ultimately does report to the president. But it's an independent agency in that the director is supposed to have a 5-year term that goes into the next presidential term. And should not be removed except for cause. We were always worried about where Donald Trump would try to remove Walter Schaub, but he did not. But Walter Schaub's term was going to expire, and I think he was absolutely right to point out, and he told this to the New York Times. Apparently, I read in today's paper that this approach is making us the laughing stock.
That's it.
Of the world with respect to ethics. And I just want to add to that, I think there's a lot of laughing going on in the Kremlin right now.
Yeah, I do too.
We really look bad.
Oh, well, listen, every one of the intelligence heads that have testified said the same thing as you. That Russia is laughing right now. They're chortling right now. They're hysterical laughing right now. And Walter Schaub, who headed up the Office of Government Ethics, he said, I think we are pretty close to a laughing stock at this point. He said it's hard for the United States to pursue international anti-corruption and ethics initiatives when we're not even keeping our own side of the street clean.
Well, that's certainly a problem. I mean, we stuck to a new low here, and it's not just about the Russia business. It's about conflicts of interest here in the United States with respect to the president's investments, the Kushner family, the obstruction of justice problem that we had with the firing of James Comey from the FBI.
And Preet Bharara. Now we're finding out Preet Bharara was prosecuting the Prevezon case, which Natalia and Mr. Mention was also, they were also counsel on that case. So, I mean, this circle is very tight. It's very small.
Yes, but I think we're going to get to the bottom of what's going on. Congress is going to have increasing amount of pressure to investigate. If the members of Congress don't do their job, I think they're going to get voted out. The president's approval ratings are going in the tank.
Yeah, I saw them today.
Yeah, it's not a good situation for anybody right now, particularly for the Republicans, because they're going to have to take ownership of this situation or stand up to the president. And I remember when Donald Trump won the nomination, a lot of Republicans saying, well, the worst thing that could happen to our party would be if he won.
Yes. I remember. I remember the Never Trumpers. I remember even Elliot Cohen and I started to agree. It's a very bizarre world right now. This makes for strange bedfellows, but I'm so glad that you will, climb in with me every once in a while.
Oh, we're going to have to keep them. We're going to have to keep a light of fire under them and keep our eye on it because this is getting worse. It's going to probably get worse before it gets better. I am not convinced that this president wants to conduct himself in this office in accordance with the Constitution, what he's required to do under law. And we do not elect a king in this country. We don't have a royal family. That's another problem, all the nepotism going on. And we have a president who has to serve under the terms set forth of the Constitution and the rest of our laws. And that's not what's going on right now.
What did you, just as a last little thought, it just popped into my head. It's never going to happen, but I know that there were some Democrats in the House who wanted to introduce a bill based on the 25th Amendment where they were going to have a commission to judge presidential fitness. Has the time come for that, or is it ridiculous?
Well, I am concerned about the president's psychological state from time to time when he tweets and he gets angry. And the concern is this situation deteriorates with respect to the Russia investigation, whether he's going to lose his cool and can lose his cool in a situation involving North Korea or something else.
Oh, yeah.
Where he's got control of the nukes there. And the 25th Amendment is designed to allow the cabinet, the vice president,
right,
to either temporarily or with the consent of Congress permanently remove the president from his duties for reasons really related to the president's physical or mental health. But I think we should be willing to give that serious consideration, at least at a temporary basis. If a president isn't able to handle things, and it wouldn't necessarily just be Trump, you could have a situation where there's just too much stress, and you get the nuclear power, nuclear weapons and everything, and you have something like a Cuban Missile Crisis. I mean, not every president is up to handling something like that, and if you don't sideline them, say take a vacation,
Oh my God! Well, let's just hope
the vice president in there, you could blow it all up.
Let's just hope he suffers from nothing but Twitter Tourette's, because
we would hope so. But I don't think the 25th Amendment ought to be dismissed out of hand. We ought to also remember it can be temporary. You can temporarily remove and say the president's going to step aside for a month or two while we figure it out and see whether he's ready to go forward.
So, counsel, let me ask you a question. When you say 25th Amendment, cabinet, and consent of Congress, do you need both, or can one or the other?
Well, you temporarily, with the vice president, the majority of the cabinet, and that's the temporary measure. And I think that's what's most important, because you could have a very tense situation, maybe North Korea or something like that. It's just very clear the president is not have a mental capacity to handle that situation at that moment. I think the 25th Amendment steps are justified on a temporary basis. To permanently remove the president or to, for a prolonged period, remove the president, Congress is going to need to be involved, and there does, under the Constitution, have to be a vote of both houses. But I think that all the different options under the 25th Amendment will have to be taken seriously.
Oh, my God.
And looked at. That doesn't mean we use them.
Right.
We need to be taking them seriously. The cabinet members need to know that's part of their obligation for the public safety.
I'm frightened now. Thank you. No, I agree with you. I understand. I just wanted to know whether or not you thought the 25th Amendment was something that we ought to actually, pay attention to and explore at the very least. And I guess your answer is yes. So, like I said...
Well, yeah, I think we ought to explore it and know what it's about. And know if we have to use it, it's there. The cabinet members,
like I said, let's just hope that he unwinds by tweeting and not unravels by bombing. Because, I could see it. I really can. Well, listen, I am so grateful that you take the time for us. Congratulations on the, the logs at Mar-a-Lago. Hopefully the White House is next. I really appreciate it. And keep up the good work and stay in touch with us as much as you can.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Great. Bye-bye.
Bye. I love him. He sounds exactly the way you'd want him to sound. He sounds like a Bush ethics advisor as far as, I just love him. And he doesn't mince words. And, he is a professor of corporate law. Okay? He teaches corporate law, which includes ethics. He's also been the counselor to W. His ethics advisor. So I think he knows a little bit about what he's talking about. But the scary part is everybody's just saying, my God, this guy wakes up angry. And what if something happens? And, you know, it's not just Twitter Tourette's, but it's global Tourette's. And, you know, he starts, you know, screaming. He wants to take out this or that. He gets so angry. 25th Amendment, anybody?
Clear for takeoff. Randi Rhodes Air Force. Air Force. RandiRhodes.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production.
For WIN, I'm Joanne Powers. A tentative agreement reached late Saturday night between the SAG-AFTRA union and National Public Radio has averted a strike by over 400 news and programming workers. The deal was reached at the end of a 24-hour contract extension after almost 300 workers voted to seek strike authorization from the union's national board. The union says the deal provides for salary increases and effectively repelled efforts to erode union protections and institute a two-tiered salary system. The union had strenuously opposed plans by NPR to create a separate pay scale for new hires, demanding equal pay for equal work. The union expressed concern that such a policy would adversely affect the hiring of women and people of color. The workers have yet to ratify the 3-year contract. Workers at frozen food company Lamb Weston in Twin Falls, Idaho, have failed in their bid to form a union in an election that concluded on Saturday. Timothy Aceves, Secretary-Treasurer for Teamsters Local 483 in Boise, Idaho, says they were surprised to receive quite a few votes less than even the number of cards workers had originally signed in support of the union campaign.
I can only attribute that to the union busters, Craft Breezy, that had unfettered access for weeks at a time and mandatory meetings prior to the election. They were portraying the union as thugs, shysters that would tell the people what they wanted to hear in order to make something similar to a sale. And of course, we're not salesmen. We're in a labor movement trying to provide a path for people to better their lives.
The union has filed a complaint with the National Labor Relations Board, alleging that the company and their consultants, Craft Breezy, participated in several unfair labor practices, such as threatening to close the plant if the workers voted to unionize, and pulling workers into supervisors' offices to discuss their union affiliation. The union is also moving forward with charging the company under Idaho's right-to-work statute. Daryl Hardenbrook, Director of Representation for Local 483, described the election as pretty ugly.
The state has allowed an outside company to come in and illegally threaten and coerce and badger and single out immigrants into thinking that if they do exercise their legal rights, harm could come to them. I wish people could see what I've seen in the last couple of months. It's appalling. I just can't believe that in 2017 this is allowed to happen. But we're not done. It's not over. It's not over.
Brought to you by the IBEW, 750,000 men and women powering the way for an American comeback. Information on how to become an International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Power Professional is online at ibew.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com.
The Randi Rhodes Show is live on RandiRhodes.com and the free Progressive Voices app for Android and iOS. Visit the App Store or ProgressiveVoices.com now.
What I say is what I say.
We're learning about this Russian lawyer, Veselnitskaya, this guy, Ahmed Shin. It seems as though there has been a fairly deep Russian effort to influence American elections, laws, institutions for a while now.
Well, basically, the Russians are taking advantage of our sort of leniency and our liberalism in the system, and that's absolutely true. And what's remarkable is how many what I call enablers there are in Washington that are very happy to just take that money in from the Russians or from whoever. And this is a big problem, which there's supposed to be rules in place, something called the Foreign Agent Registration Act, which demands that everybody disclose if they're working for a foreign government. And the Magnitsky case is a prime example where they're trying to influence get people to repeal the Magnitsky Act, and they had all these lawyers, and I'm not talking about Russian lawyers, I'm talking about American lawyers and American lobbyists who were showing up in the halls of Congress working on behalf of the Russian government and working on behalf of Natalia Veselnitskaya and Rinat Akhmetshin, and not saying that they were foreign agents. And so I actually filed a complaint with the Department of Justice to go after this. There's hearings on Wednesday in Washington at the Senate Judiciary Committee in which I'm testifying about how the rules don't work.
That's great. That is great news. Okay, that is the best news. That was Bill Browder. Bill Browder is the person who came to the United States. He was born on the south side of Chicago, and he moved to the UK and started this investment fund in Russia, and they ripped him off really badly, and he came back to the United States, and because of his complaints about what this company Prevezon, for whom Natalia Veselnitskaya was the attorney of record, was doing, Preet Bharara brought a civil case in the Southern District of New York. Now, you know that story because we had that story. I put that story together just by reading last Monday, I believe, last Monday or Tuesday, and showed it to you. Now, Bill Browder realizes that the time is right to really, really tell the story, although he has written a book called Red Notice. And so I started reading that book. It grabs you right away. It's the most amazing. I mean, for those of you who like Tom Clancy novels and, you know, any kind of spy stuff, you like the Bourne movies, whatever, this is real life. And it's just that crazy. And it starts with him being detained in the Russian airport in Moscow. It's just an amazing story. Anyway, Bill Browder is going to testify in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee this Wednesday. And he is going to tell them everything that he knows. Hopefully somebody, Al Franken, will ask him about the Prevezon case. We'll ask him about Akhmetshin and his involvement with Prevezon, and Natalia Veselnitskaya and who brought her to that hearing that they had about Russian relations at the Foreign Relations Committee headed by Dana Rohrabacher and Congressman Royce. I mean, these guys apparently took money from Russia too. And when Browder is sitting there saying, you know, it's amazing, but you really did have American lawyers and you had American ex-congressmen, you had a current congressman, all vouching for this guy and taking them around to the congressional offices and blah, blah, blah. He is talking about Dana Rohrabacher, and he is talking about, former Congress members who now are parts of lobby shops. So let's just hope the questioning goes well on Friday, because Browder's got a lot of information to share. He's willing to share it. He will be under oath, and this will not be his first time under oath. So I really look forward to Wednesday. C-SPAN's going to be your best friend, because I'm not sure that the media, I can tell you for sure, Fox News isn't going to cover this. But I don't know how the media at large will feel about covering this. But just in case they don't, Bill Browder will be on our show on Friday. I went hunting for him. Okay, I literally, it was the hunt for Red October. I looked for him, and I found him through his book publisher, which is a great way to find people. And he has agreed. We talked over the weekend, and he has agreed. He's going to testify on Wednesday. Thursday he was traveling, so we'll have him on Friday. And if those questions aren't asked, trust me, we will ask them, and you will finally understand what the hell is going on with this Magnitsky Act and what the adoption subject was really all about. Shorthanded, it was all about lifting sanctions on Putin and his henchmen. Those are the people who the sanctions were placed on after Magnitsky was found dead. Putin and his oligarch henchmen. And it's a fascinating story, and I'm so glad he said yes. So that's what we'll do on Friday.
Call in, connect. To speak to Randi, call 561-270-3844. 561-270-3844.
Hi, this is Green Under Pressure, and I'm your host, Susan DiGiulio. Have you heard about EDGI? That's the Environmental Data and Governance Initiative, an international network of academics and nonprofits combating potential threats to federal scientific data, and especially climate data, by budget cuts to the EPA, NOAA, NASA, and a slew of other government agencies, and by those within the Trump administration who simply want to discredit and bury science when it doesn't serve their agenda. I recently had a chance to talk with Rebecca Lave, who is deeply engaged in coordinating EDGI's tracking of our environmental data and the telling of our environmental story. Rebecca teaches about environmental issues in geography at Indiana University.
EDGI began immediately after the election, I think about 3 days after, when a postdoc named Nick Shapiro sent an email to a bunch of close colleagues, most of whom were involved in research relating to environmental justice and the EPA, saying, hey, you know, if this candidate chooses to follow through with what he said he's going to, there could be some big problems. What are we going to do? So that was the initial start to EDGI.
And how did you personally get involved?
So just stepping back a moment, during the fall semester, I was teaching a class on environment and society, and the last 6 weeks of that class is always on climate change. And so the election happened in the middle of that, and suddenly a class that had been pretty straightforward started to seem pretty politically fraught. And I had just been teaching a class on renewable energy where we were drawing on data sets that were available on the website of the Energy Information Administration, which is part of the Department of Energy. It's the place that's supposed to have the kind of neutral, objective information on different energy sources, among other things. And as I was walking back from class, it occurred to me that that data might not be available the next time I taught the class. So as I was thinking that, I got home and I saw an email from a dear friend who had been one of the initial 14 on Nick's email saying, hey, you know, we're starting this thing, want to do this? And I was like, heavens, yes.
Rebecca explains the initial goals of EDGI.
EDGI had 3 priorities that we were working on. The attempting to archive vulnerable data sets was very much part of that, and that was some of the data rescue events that we organized with our partners at Data Refuge at the University of Pennsylvania. Another big focus, we started getting ready to version track federal environmental websites so that we could track changes not just to available data sets, but also to the basic information about environmental issues and conditions that are found on federal websites. And then the third initiative that we also began immediately was interviews with long-term career staff at federal environmental agencies to start trying to get a sense of how the current presidential transition compared to past transitions.
Rebecca clarified the difference between data losses, the hiding of data, and the alteration of language on web pages.
We really feel strongly about this, and I think that there's been some public confusion, so I want to be very clear that the only data set that has been removed since the transition in administrations was one from the USDA about animal welfare, and happily those reports were in the form of PDFs, and most of them were already publicly available through the Internet Archive. We have not seen any other data sets taken down. What we are seeing instead is 2 key things. So one, we're seeing the story rewritten. We're seeing the language with which particular environmental phenomena are described being changed to, de-emphasize the role of fossil fuels in climate change, for example. We're also seeing the actual loss of public access to information. And it's not always clear whether those losses come from deliberate action or from kind of accidental ineptitude. So, for example, there was a big section of web pages about climate change that were removed with a link saying that they were available in a public archive, but they weren't. So there have been losses like that, which also seem to us to be significant, because the federal environmental agencies are kind of the neutral information source of choice for, say, elementary school kids writing school reports and even college classes like my own, right? We go there to get trusted information on things like mercury, HFCs, all of this. So if that information changes or we lose access to it, it's actually a really big deal.
Final thoughts?
This is a really bleak, at least a really bleak potential for what may happen. And to Edgy, there is a really serious silver lining, which is that there is more public attention focused on what is happening with environmental governance in this country than there has been in decades. So it seems to us that this is a terrible situation that also presents a wonderful opportunity to really stop and rethink how we do environmental governance in this country, how environmental data is collected, what questions we try to answer, what we try to do with policy. Because, in many ways, environmental policy in the U.S. has been this stunning success. If you think about the Clean Water Act, for example, you can now swim in almost any water body in the U.S., which was not the case when I was a kid. Okay, but there are still communities where you can't drink the tap water, like Flint, right? So there are some clear successes and some equally painful failures. And it seems like this is a moment to really stop and think about what we're starting to call environmental data justice.
If you want to read more about Edgy's work, I strongly recommend you go to their website. It's envirodata.gov.org.
You've been listening to Green Under Pressure. Green Under Pressure is a regular feature on Progressive Voices.